I will now introduce Laura Jones, our Executive Vice President, Chief Strategic Officer. Thank you, Laura.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're in. Great to be with everybody today with some good news for a change. So we had a big announcement on Friday, and we'll get to that in a minute. First, I'm going to introduce my co-host today. So Corinne Pullman is our Senior Vice President of National Affairs and Partnerships. She's based in our Ottawa office. I often refer to her as our, expert in all things to do with the federal government. And Brendan is also with us. Brendan Rolfe is our business counselor, and he answers the phone from British Columbia, where I'm also based here in Vancouver. And so together we're going to do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can about the latest government announcements. And for those of you who were with us last Thursday, we were saying that we were kind of watching with bated breath our phones and our computers we were kind of waiting for something, and sure enough, we did get a big announcement on Friday. So we're happy to update you on some of the details today, but of course there's also some information that is not out yet that we don't know yet in terms of the details of how some of this will all work, but we're going to share the latest and hopefully answer as many questions as we can. So before we get to that, I'll just, for those of you who are new to the webinars, I will tell you that our commitment is to make sure that our website is up to date with the frequently asked questions. And we're also looking at kind of reorganizing our website a little bit to make it a little bit easier to find, because now there are so many questions that it can be a long list, but there's some great information on that website. So please check that if you have questions. We update our frequently asked questions based on what we hear from you and based on also what we hear from on our helplines through counselors like Brendan. And our number is there, but we will repeat the number at the end of the webinar, so don't feel that you have to frantically write it down. Also, as Alexa said, the whole slide deck is in the handout section, and I want to repeat that today because there are a few slides that Corinne and I were going through it yesterday, and we're like, oh, these slides are a little dense with text, but we wanted to make sure the information is there for you in writing. So it is there on the handout slide, and you can download that and print it if you like. And so on the next slide, I always like to start these webinars, as those who have been joining us for many weeks know, with a few quotes, because as I was telling one of my kids last night, who is suffered a COVID-related disappointment, something he's no longer able to do because of some new COVID restrictions. And we were talking about it as a family, and we were saying this time that we're in is really, really hard for everyone. And so we have to find ways to bring the positivity and the light to each other and lean on each other, including leaning on the wisdom of others. So I think it was actually Rachel who joins us on some of the webinars who yesterday found some quotes, and the first one really made me smile, especially once I knew it was from Big Bird, that bad days happen to everyone. Just keep doing your best, and don't let those bad days make you feel bad about yourself. And then, it's hard to beat a person who never gives up. That's good wisdom. I personally, my colleagues know I love to dance, and so if in life you stumble, make it part of your dance is another great one. So some wisdom on this slide that maybe will put a smile on your face or give you a little bit of inspiration. And as we get into the key topics that are going to be covered today, so that overview that we're talking about, and for many weeks there have been a few new things. This week we've got some major new things to update you on. So finally, and speaking of dancing, I know I told some of you I'd be dancing on my desk when we got a better rent program announced, and that announcement finally came. So I'm excited to give you some of the details of that. It's not perfect, nothing ever is, but boy, is it better than what we had. CEBA, some of the things that we've been advocating for on CEBA. We'll talk about a new extra amount of loan with an extra forgivable portion, and then an update on the announcement on CEWS. And then with this, I'm always, again, for those of you who are new, keeping a business log or journal is probably a good practice, you know, even in normal times, but in COVID times where you're accessing different government supports and you're making different decisions for your business, you know, a journal is a great thing to do. I should also say we'll also cover some of the new closures. So for those of you in Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, affected by this as well, I believe. So there's some new closure information that we'll cover, and Brendan is on the phone. So if you have questions about that, we'll try and get you answers with respect to some of what's going on with respect to business closures at the provincial level. And so with that, we will get into just, I like to show the small business recovery dashboard. This has stayed very, very static over the past, you know, kind of month, 6-week period. So this is where we're hoping that that normal sales, the number of you that are back to normal sales, that will start to move in a better direction. But at the moment, we're still at 30% with about 40% of you fully staffed and 70% fully open. So that's something we continue to update and get out to policymakers across Canada. And you can check this out and some other small business stats at our Small Business Everyday .ca. The link is down there. We've got some interesting stats that we're, again, trying to make sure that the public understands where small business is at, the public and politicians, as an important part of our work. Okay, on the next slide, Corinne, I think you and I are going to do some of this together. So I'll let you walk through the basics, and then maybe I'll jump on again when we talk about rent.
I was on mute. Sorry about that.
That's going to be the catchphrase here.
I just don't want everybody to hear all the typing going on as I try to answer folks' questions. So good day, everybody. I'm glad you could join us again today. I know, as Laura said, there was lots of news on Friday, which much of it I think is really good news. It did not, unfortunately, deal with some of the gaps that are still out there. We'll talk about that as well. And we don't have all the details yet, but certainly I think we have a pretty good sense of what's coming. So just in a nutshell, we'll talk about each of these in more detail in a minute, but just in a nutshell, there is a new rent relief program. It's going to be called the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. We'll talk about that in more detail, and that's going to go directly to the tenants and will be based on the amount of the revenue loss of the company. So it'll be on a sliding scale, much like the wage subsidy. In fact, you're going to find a lot of similarities between what they're proposing for the emergency rent subsidy and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. So we will talk about that in a lot more detail in a minute. Secondly, they did extend the Canada Emergency Business Account by another $20,000, with $10,000 of that being forgivable if it's paid back by the end of 2022. So that's going to be an extension. And we'll again talk about a bit more detail of what we know about who's eligible, how it will work, and what criteria might be added to that. Wage subsidy, that they're going to maintain it at current levels, which means that you can still get up to 65% wage subsidy until December 19th. As you may recall, this is on a sliding scale. We'll also talk about that a little bit more, but that's no longer going to be the case. They're going to freeze it where it is. And so there are some other slight tweaks to the wage subsidy, but for the most part, it hasn't changed much other than they're freezing it. But we'll talk about that too in a second. The other thing, though, before we get into those details, a few other things we want to make sure you are aware of is that the Canada Response Benefit, the CRB, which is the replacement to the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and the new EI system opened up for applications this week. So anybody who was an employee or self-employed who was collecting the CERB is now going to be able to move on to this new platform. This basically means that you can get $500 a week or maybe slightly more if there are people on EI. In income support, if your income is down at least 50% or more during the application period due to COVID-19. Now, this is for the folks who are moving from the CERB to the Canada Response Benefit, the CRB piece. You can only access it if you have a loss of income of at least 50% for the period for which you're applying, and it is for $500 per week. You do have to reapply every 2 weeks, so it works very much like the EI system, where you have to sort of continuously tell government that you are still available and willing to work every 2 weeks. It's the same thing under the new Canada Response Benefit. If you're self-employed, you have to attest that you are still looking for work and still trying to gather work in your self-employment state. The good news, of course, is that you can earn a lot more money, up to $38,000 per year, which is just around $3,000 per month before they start to scale back that benefit. And the scale back will be 50 cents for every dollar earned that will be scaled back from the amount of benefit that you've received. And that will all be sort of determined when you do your taxes. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to bring Brendan in on this one, because I know on the phones, they've had a lot of questions around the transition from the CERB to the EI or CRB, and there are slight differences between the two. So Brendan, you were going to walk us through a little bit of that. You're on mute, Brendan.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Corinne. So the important thing to, am I?
No, you're good now. We can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, fabulous. So yeah, it's important to note that there are sort of two things to consider when discussing how an employee will be transitioned onto either EI or the CRB. So the first thing to note is that any of those workers who are EI eligible should apply through EI regular benefits. So if they're eligible, if they meet the minimum hours threshold, the government has stated that they wish for those workers to apply through the EI portal for EI regular benefits. The CRB is actually created for those who are not currently EI eligible. So it's kind of like a last resort rather than the first resort. So that's the first important thing to note. The second important thing to note is whether or not workers will be automatically transitioned onto EI or the CRB depends on how they first applied for CERB when that existed. So if they applied for CERB through the Service Canada portal, or they applied for EI at first, just as the pandemic struck before CERB existed through the EI portal and were transitioned onto CERB, they will automatically be transitioned from CERB back onto the EI regular benefits without having to do anything. So they'll have to continue on with their biweekly reporting, but the government has told us that they'll be put right back onto the regular EI benefits if there isn't work available for them just yet. So they don't really need to do anything in most cases. However, if they applied for CERB through the online portal or through the phone line, rather than, so the CRA portal rather than the Service Canada portal, they will need to reapply, again, in most cases, for EI regular benefits or for the CRB program. So this is the distinction, basically. If they first applied through Service Canada, likely they won't have to do anything further. They'll be automatically transitioned onto the EI benefits. If they apply through the CRA portal for CERB, they will have to reapply for EI or for the CRB program. Now, the most important thing to note and how that affects you is that you actually don't have to do anything in either circumstance. So you've already filed that original record of employment, which indicated to the government that there'd be a break or decrease in earnings of at least 50%. You've done your part. So basically it falls in the laps of your workers to ensure that they apply for the proper benefit and to make sure they have all the necessary eligibility criteria and requirements. So if we look at the two benefits, let's go through EI first. Now, I mentioned that this is just for workers who are EI eligible. And again, this is ROE based as well. So this means that if a worker does go 7 consecutive days without earnings, you are required to file that ROE. And they do require the ROE to collect on these benefits. Now, the benefit, it reverts back to exactly what it was pre-COVID. So that means that your worker can earn, in this case, $500 to $573 per week. Now, if they plan to work while on their EI benefit, they can earn up to $75 per week without the government taking any of it. And then after that point, the government will take 50 cents out of every dollar after the $75 per week. So exactly what it was before, before the EI or before COVID struck. Now I should mention that sub-plans are allowed, once again, if they are on EI regular benefits, and the sub-plan is a supplemental unemployment benefit, which is basically you topping up the workers' wages while they are off on their regular EI benefit. And this can be done two ways. The first way is you register a plan with the government, and the second is an unregistered plan. Now, I should note that if the plan is not registered, the government takes more of that money from your worker, whereas if you register that plan with the government, they take a whole lot less. So I'd advise registering your plan if you can. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, and you can do it online. And now covering the CRB, which is the Canada Recovery Benefit. This works largely the same as the old CERB program, but again, it's for workers who cannot access EI. It's important to note as well that this is not a choice for your workers. They can't say, you know what, I don't really feel like working, I want to go back on the CRB. You know, please don't give me as much hours, I won't take them. Basically, this is a last resort if you just don't have the hours available for them. So this is not a choice. This is something that they'd be forced into using. As well, you as the owner can work on this program. And we're actually encouraging our members who maybe are taking dividends or haven't paid themselves throughout this period, which is very common, or who are earning less than 50% of their regular earnings. It's important to note, as I said, that it's self-attestation based, which means that you basically tell the government that you are qualified for the CRB. Once again, you have to have earned at least $5,000 over the last 12 months. You have to be at least 15 years of age. And again, you must have lost some of your ability to earn your regular pre-COVID income due to COVID. Now, I should mention as well that this benefit pays out $500 per week, so that is that flat fee, as opposed to the EI, which is a percentage base of what the employee's earnings were. And in this case, it's also important to note, as was covered in the last slide, that your working ability while on a claim allows you to earn up to $38,000 per year without that going against your benefits. And of course, any dollar earned over $38,000, the government will take 50 cents out of that dollar. And this $38,000 does not include the benefit itself. So it doesn't include the $2,000 per month. You can earn that $2,000 per month in addition to the $38,000 without it going, against your benefits and your earnings. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have more questions or if I spoke too quickly, feel free to pop me a question in the box on the right-hand side of your screen. Otherwise, Corinne, I will throw it back to you, and I will excuse myself to answer as many questions as I can as they flood in.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brendan. And so Brendan is our person on the EI and Canada Response Benefit. If you have questions, for sure, all of us, though, can help answer them if needed. So we want to talk briefly before we get into the details of the big announcements about some of the things that are happening across the country provincially. Unfortunately, we are seeing things worsening in certain parts of Canada. We know that, for example, last week we talked about in Quebec, they have the red zones of Montreal, Quebec City, Chaudière-Appalaches. This has now been extended to include the city of Gatineau. And there is an increased, caution about travel between regions within Quebec, which is something they had done in the first round as well. So it's really starting to limit people from being able to move from different parts of the province to another. In Ontario, the hot zones are considered Toronto, Peel, and Ottawa. There, they have gone further now since we last spoke last week. They now have prohibited indoor dining, personal care services where masks have to be removed, and team sports games and so forth in those three parts of Ontario. They've also required gyms to be closed, cinemas, casinos, performing arts, and racing venues also to be shut down. And there's reduced capacity limits to 10 people indoors, as you can see here. And that's for just those three areas right now in Ontario. However, hopefully we won't go beyond that, but that has been an update since last week. So it's gotten a bit tougher for those businesses in those regions. We also know that in New Brunswick, there's been also further shutdowns in Moncton and Restigouche as they try to manage a specific outbreaks in those areas, which means they've closed contact personal services such as barbers, hairstylists, or spas, as well as gym, fitness facilities, as well as casinos, amusement centers, bingo halls, and so forth. So you can see the list there. So unfortunately, some of this is spreading. It is still targeted within each province. However, it's unfortunate to see this happening in many parts. We know that there are other parts of Canada, such as Edmonton and Alberta, where they have voluntarily asked people to get more strict around the rules that are there. It's not required as of yet. But if there are certain restrictions happening in your part of the country that we haven't acknowledged here, then please let us know that are brand new. Certainly, we're trying to keep track as much as we can on what's happening. If we go to the next slide, though, there is some good news. This is just to let you know that one province has launched a fairly good grant, though it does have a bit of paperwork involved to get at, and that's in British Columbia. We've talked about this grant for a few weeks now. It's called the Business Recovery Grant. It has now been launched. Here you'll see the different steps you have to go through. I won't go through it in detail for those that are in British Columbia, but it's important to know that it is a grant of between $10,000 to $30,000 with a top up for those in the tourism business between $5,000 and $10,000. And just so you know, if you have revenues of up to $100,000, you can get up to $10,000. In order to get the $30,000, your revenues have to be quite a bit larger, for as much as $3 million. And there's sort of stages in between, depending on the amount of revenue the grant goes up. And of course, as you'll see below, there is a bit more money available to tourism businesses based on the number of employees they have that are BC residents. So more details there. If you want to take a read through, I encourage you to take the handout that's associated with today's webinar, and you can have that with you, and certainly call our business helpline because people like Brendan are going to be able to help you walk through what you need to do. Okay, I think we're ready to move into more details. If we move to the next slide, yes. So I might bring Laura back up on this one, yes, to talk a bit about the big announcements. So we'll start with the rent subsidy. So I'll let you take the lead on this one, Laura, and I'll jump in as needed. So you're on mute, Laura.
Thanks, Corinne. Still on mute?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, good. Okay, it wasn't showing.
Can you hear us?
Weird. Yes, I can hear you. Okay, so so thanks everyone, and thanks for your patience with the technology. So on the government rent subsidy, we finally had some good news on Friday. As those of you who have been joining us for many weeks know, this has been one that we have been fighting for a long time, and we got an awful lot of what it was we were hoping to get. Not everything though, so let me walk you through the program. And before I walk through these bullets, I'll just say that there are a few things that we were looking for. One, we wanted the relief to go directly to the tenants, and so that is in place. So you'll see the relief is going directly to the tenants with no landlord involvement. And we know that's something that both our landlord members and our tenant members were hoping to see in the program. The second thing we were asking government for was to make sure that the program was no longer kind of a month-to-month extension of a program where everything was kind of in a little bit in, you were in limbo waiting to know what was going to happen month to month with rent, but that it would go at least through the fall and longer for businesses that were severely affected. So they did announce that the program will be available until June 2021. So that was a second big thing we were looking for. The third thing we were looking for is, as those of you who needed the first program were aware, there was a cliff that you needed a 70% revenue loss. And, you know, we said, look, if you're down even 10% or 20%, that's still a big revenue loss for a small business. And we wanted a program that would be more flexible and cover more businesses. And so they delivered on that. And as Corinne said, it's going to work like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. So there will be a sliding scale. And even if you were at 1% revenue loss, it may not be worth applying at that low revenue loss, but even at 1%, you're eligible to get something. So you will be eligible on a sliding scale. We don't have all of the details of the program available yet. We have a call later this afternoon with the Canada Revenue Agency where we're trying to get some more details. They will be the ones administering the program. And as I just said, it covers a lot of the things we wanted. One thing it doesn't cover, and Derek had asked this question already in the question box, is will it cover retroactively? So for the months prior to October, where some of you were not able to get rent relief, will there be anything for you for those months? And we were fighting for that, as you know, and but as of right now, the program does not cover that. So for those of you who were not able to access the first program, the CECRA program for rent relief, there's nothing extra in this for you. It will go forward from October on. In terms of the application process, this isn't public, but what we were told privately is that November, early November is the likely time frame when the applications for the October rent relief will be made available. So those applications are not available yet, and there are many details that we're still looking for. Having said all of that, this I think is much better than the program we had in the past, and is finally we've got some good news on the rent relief side. So a few more of the details there on the slide. The program they're going to design, the program is going to work one way until December 19th. And like with the wage subsidy, there may be a different version of this with different numbers in it for the next, for the December to June portion. And so we don't know yet what that might look like. But if we focus on between now and December 19th, the revenue, it will cover up to 65% of your rent, and that will be based on revenue loss. And there will also be a top up for businesses that that were required to shut down due to health orders, and that may cover as much as 90% of your rent. There's still some details in there that we need to work out, like what, you know, if you're just open for takeout, for example, because of a health order, are you covered? Are you part of that or not? So we need to talk to CRA and ask them a bunch of questions. And my guess is that the questions you're going to be asking us on this webinar are going to be very useful for us this afternoon as we get through those details. So please do ask your questions, but likely we'll have to get back to you on future webinars and through our FAQs on the answers to some of those questions. Also $75,000 cap per location. So the previous program was up to $50,000. This is $75,000 per cap per location. And then there is a limit though to the maximum that any one company can get, and that limit is $300,000. So if you have multiple locations, you can get up to $300,000 for relief, but you may have some that are outside of that, and so some that would not be covered. So hopefully that's fairly clear. Yeah, the applications, as we said, will be available early November, and then that will cover your October rent. We don't know yet what will be required for those applications, whether it will be some kind of simple attestation or you have to show some documentation for your rent. We're not sure what that's going to look like, and I've already had some questions come in about, you know, well, how will we know that the money goes to rent? And so those are all questions that we need to ask CRA later today. And with that, that covers the basics of, I guess we're going to call it the CEWS program now, the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, and how we're getting from CECRA to CEWS. From the old program, this replaces that old program and is the new program. On the next slide, I think I'm bringing Corinne back for the next slide. Yeah, okay. So here's a few more details, Corinne. The few more details that your team put together, just in terms of the, you know, some actual calculations, because there are different, like with the wage subsidy, and they really are trying to parallel it with the wage subsidy in many ways, which will make things, I think, a little bit easier. But the rent program itself, compared to the old one, just it's quite different. So there are these three buckets, you know, so for anyone up to a 50% revenue loss, you're going to get 0.8 times your current revenue loss. And so we've got a little example there. If you've got a 20% revenue loss, you're going to get 16% rent subsidy. For those with a more than 50% revenue loss, but not required to shut down, there's a slightly different formula, and that will kick out what you are going to get. There's a little extra in there, and that maxes out at 65%. Again, these slides are available. We understand like doing math isn't everybody's favorite thing, and there's a little bit of math to calculate these things. CRA will likely have a calculator for you in any case. And then I mentioned a minute ago, there's those categories of businesses that are forced to shut down completely, and the rent subsidy will be higher for those businesses. So it will go up to 90%. And there's a little star right after if a business is forced to shut down completely, because Corinne and I were talking yesterday about various different scenarios and questions we imagine we're going to get. You know, I have to shut down, but I'm still doing some online business. Will I be eligible for this? Those are the kinds of questions, a long list of questions that we're going to be putting to CRA later today and on an ongoing basis. My guess is, Corinne, that they won't have all of the answers even today. But this kind of covers what we know so far about rent. The only other thing I'd add, Corinne, is that this has to be legislated. And but there's no reason to expect that any of the opposition parties are going to oppose this. They're not in this week, they're back next week. We know they want to do this quickly. They've announced it. I don't think there's any reason to expect there's going to be any challenges with this, but I should just say that it does need to be legislated. Did I miss anything, Corinne?
Yeah, but it is politics and you never know.
Now
but,
I can't hear you.
I would think so.
Are you on mute?
No. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, it's our system's a bit slow today.
Yes.
Yeah, so you never know with politicians what's gonna happen, but at the same time, I agree. I think that there's a real sense that this has to be addressed, and so we're hoping that they'll work cooperatively and quickly and get it passed starting next week. All right. So we'll move to the next slide then.
Great.
Thank you. So I'll take it back up here and talk a little bit about some of the other details in regards to the Canada Emergency Business Account. So the Canada Emergency Business Account, also some really good news. They have expanded it by $20,000 with up to $10,000 of that being forgivable. And that's if it's all paid back by the end of 2022, which is very much what it was under the $40,000 grant as well. This will make the total CEBA alone being about $60,000 if you're able to access both sides of it, with $20,000 of that, or about 1/3 of it, potentially forgivable if you pay it back by the end of 2022. What we've been told so far is that anyone who has already accessed CEBA, so if you did it through the payroll process or you did it through the non-deferrable expense process, you will be eligible for the expansion as well. But what will happen is the banks will require the applicant to attest that they've had a revenue loss due to COVID-19. So it's a bit of a different nuance than in the first round. So they do want, you don't have to necessarily prove it, but you do have to attest to it. And by attesting to it, if they decide to audit you later, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate that you had a revenue loss during that period, or that's the part we don't know. Like, is it over what period of time? Is it just for that month, or is it for basically during the whole COVID period that you've had some kind of revenue loss? So that's the level of detail we just don't have. But at this point, we've been told by the banks that that will be the way they will sort of gather that information, will be attestation that you've had a revenue loss due to COVID-19 in order to get the extra $20,000. They also extended the deadline. As you may recall, the deadline for CEBA was going to be the end of October 31st. Given these changes, obviously, they've extended it now to end of December, so December 31st, 2020, for all of the different types of CEBA applications, not just the extension. So if you still haven't applied for the original $40,000, you still can do that as well. Applicants are expected to open, we're hoping, late October, early November, we're being told, but again, we don't absolutely 100% know for sure. I think that's the intention of many people in government who are very conscious of getting this information and details and grants and money out the door. I would probably lean more towards the later, given what we've known about the government so far, but that is what they're aiming for. It will be delivered through the banks, as it always has been as well. Unfortunately, however, there was still no news on the outstanding CEBA issues, such as fixing some of the non-deferral expense issues, such as having to have contracts placed prior to March 1st, or some of the issues around what type of expenses are accepted or not accepted. Also for those who may have less than $40,000 in non-deferrable expenses, but most importantly is also the ones with a personal bank account. All of that is important, but the fact that the personal bank account option is still not available, which has been promised for many months now, is something that's very disappointing. So that is still not available to those with personal bank accounts. We have been told it's coming still. We were again reassured just this past week when we raised it that yes, it's in the works, it's coming soon, it's just not quite yet available. So that one, unfortunately, we still have to wait. But rest assured, if you're in that category, we are continuing to apply as much pressure as we can to get that thing out because it's just unacceptable how long it's taken to this point. The next slide, we'll talk just briefly around the wage subsidy. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so the wage subsidy was the last piece of the announcement on Friday. It had the least amount of changes to it, but I still think it was good news. As you know, the amount that is sort of that you're applying for right now, which is the amount that I think that ended at the end of September, which is period 8, we started to see, I think, a bit of a decrease in the amount of subsidy that could be eligible. So as you know, originally the wage subsidy amounts were actually set to decrease over the next few months. So every period going forward until the end of the year was going to be a lower and a lower amount of wage subsidy that you could access. The government did announce on Friday that they were going to freeze it at the current rate, which is about 0.8 times the amount of revenue loss that you have. So again, you'll notice some similarities here between the emergency wage subsidy and what's happening with the emergency rent subsidy. They both are going to be administered by CRA, and I think CRA is trying to align the two programs as much as possible. So a lot of the math will be the same, and some of the nuances and rules will be quite similar. Again, we don't know all the details on the rent subsidy. I'm making these assumptions based on what we're hearing and what we're seeing, that some of the rules will be the same. But for the wage subsidy, it will stay now at that 0.8 times the amount of whatever revenue loss you have, to a maximum of 65%. And that's, of course, when the top-up is applied. So the top-up comes in when you've had more than a 50% revenue loss. You can get as much as a 25% more on top of that, which is what brings it up to the 65%. This formula will be in place now until December 19th, 2020. The old one was only going till the end of November. We didn't really know what was happening in December, so we do have it now until December 19th, 2020. All the other rules remain the same. The only exception is that when you used to have to calculate the top-up previously, you based the top-up on 3 months average revenue loss. And they're now moving that to being based solely on a 1-month average revenue loss. And they're doing that, they said, because they felt that with businesses now being told to shut down again, they wanted to make sure that they were getting those businesses as much of the top up as possible. So by basing it on current month revenue losses only, they felt that that was going to give those businesses a much bigger portion of the wage subsidy than if they had made them spread it out over a 3-month average. So that's the only other change they were planning to make to the wage subsidy. If you're in that higher revenue loss category, it could have an impact on you. Also, of course, if you're facing shutdowns, it could potentially help you as well. We don't know what's going to happen after December 19th, but they did say, and this was announced previously, that they will be extending the wage subsidy until June of 2021. But we don't know what it's going to look like between January and June of next year. However, they have said that they recognize the need to get that information out well in advance of January, so the businesses can certainly plan about how they're going to manage going forward. So we will continue to hold them to that as well. I think that's it on those updates. If we go to the next slide, I think it's bringing back Laura into the equation. Yes, Laura, back to you.
Okay, I'm back.
If Laura is able to come, there you are. There
Yes.
you are. You are back.
All right, so one other quick update before we get to your questions is on our Small Business Everyday campaign. This is the campaign that we have to encourage people to shop local. And so next week is Small Business Week. So we expect there will be a lot of activity from lots of different folks promoting shopping local. But we will be in that parade, and we're launching a new contest to encourage Canadians to shop at independent businesses. So the way the contest is going to work is consumers can nominate their favorite businesses for a chance to win a gift box, and the consumer will win a gift box for nominating you of about worth about $1,000. So it includes some cash and some gift card from MasterCard and goodies from small businesses across the country. But the business owner themselves will also win a gift box worth a little bit more. So we're valued at about $3,000, again, including $2,500 of cash and also a MasterCard gift card. So this is kind of a fun contest. There'll be a draw every week for 6 weeks. It's a way to just keep banging the drum about the importance of shopping local. But we wanted to let all of you know about that, and you'll get an email, I believe it's Friday or Monday, on this contest, so you'll have more details about it. You can also check all the details on Monday. Will be on our smallbusinesseveryday.ca website, where this is the place where we're housing a lot of the content for all the different initiatives going on across Canada to support local businesses. But this is the one that we have that we're putting in our window. So hopefully it will be helpful. And the contest is sponsored by MasterCard, eBay, and Scotiabank. And we have some other partners who have helped us with the Small Business Everyday campaign, including Chase and Maru, and they're all profiled on the site. So that's my little ad for the Small Business Everyday contest, which I think will be fun, and we'll give you a little more detail as things progress. There was one other thing I wanted to add, Corinne, before we get to questions, and that is for our Ontario members. I know that you now have to, I was actually in Toronto, in our Toronto office last week, and we know that you have to fill out, there's a form you have to fill out for employees coming into the business. And so look for an email from us tomorrow on this. We've got a simple way to make that possible. And we know there are organizations that are saying, hey, pay us $250 a month and we'll help you with these forms. And it's actually much easier than that. And so check out our email, and we've worked to make it, we've got a little video work to make it really easy to show you how you can create an easy online form, because I guess the government of Ontario has a paper-based form, but I know we had a lot of calls into our helpline saying paper-based just doesn't work for us right now. So can we have something online? And we're doing that. I just wanted to add that in because I think we didn't put it in the deck, but Ontario members, check out that email tomorrow. And with that, I think we're going to questions. Yes. I am right. So we are going to pull our, Brendan, if you could join us, and Corinne, if you can join us on the screen, we will start tackling as many questions as we can. And for those of you who are new to the webinars, we sometimes go a little bit over, depending on how many questions we have. And we know we've got we have over 750 of you on the webinar today, so that's wonderful. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can. One question from Alana to start with, a nice quick one, is what months does the new rent subsidy, CEWS, start from? Alana, October. It's going to go from October through June, but the application for October rent, we're hearing, will not be available until early November. So that's what we know so far. Okay. Brendan, there was a question from Stephanie about the BC recovery grant, and to Stephanie, I'm going to condense what you're saying a little bit to say that the application process has been challenging and confusing, and one question she has is whether revenue will include the wage subsidy. I'm not sure we have an answer to that, Brendan, but what I do know is we talked to the deputy last week, and I talked to her before. She's very anxious to hear any challenges with the program. So any of you BC folks that have tried to get the BC grant. Feel free to follow up with us, and Stephanie, I think we'll follow up with you, because if you want our help, we can get directly. The deputy said we've got an open line into that program to get things resolved if there are problems. So Brendan, I'm just giving you a little flag that let's try and help Stephanie in particular, and maybe you could reach out to her after the call and we can kind of connect with the deputy and figure out, see if we can get her some help. Okay. Let's see. Couple of questions on the weather, including Robin's, on whether the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, the CEWS program, will be retroactive. So cover that August, September piece. And I'll take this one, and then Corinne, I'll throw to you for some questions. No, one of the things that we had wanted was that it be retroactive for those people who were shut out of rent relief, the rent relief program that was available for previous months. We did not, that was the one piece that we did not convince government of, at least not yet, but as you know, we never give up and we never go away, and that's still on our list. So we are still making the case that there should be something retroactive for businesses that were shut out of the original rent relief program. However, that is not in place right now. So the new rent relief goes from October through June. It does not cover any of the previous months for those of you who didn't have it. So that was one of the we're disappointed with. Corinne, do you want to take some from your pile?
Sure. Lots of different ones here. Obviously, many around the wage subsidy as well, and around the CEWS program. I do have one, though, I wanted to mention on the Canada Response benefits that maybe between you and I, Brendan, we can answer. But they're asking, Pamela was asking, with CRB, how does this work for new businesses started prior to COVID? However, not generating revenues or slower to generate revenues due to COVID. We cannot show a 50% reduction in income with no real history. So my immediate response to that, Brendan, and correct me if I'm wrong, is Pamela, it's not based on your business revenue, it's based on your personal income. So essentially, if you your personal income has been reduced by 50% compared to the same period last year, say you were doing something else, and you've earned at least $5,000 in the last, in 2019 or the last 12 months, you should be eligible for the CRB regardless of the business revenues. And would you agree with that, Brendan? Okay. Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yeah, completely. That's exactly how it is said. It's got nothing to do with that business revenue.
Yeah, so Pamela, feel free as long as you have.
I haven't actually muted my line once.
Yeah, I think it's just, yes.
I think there's just a lag on the system. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. I'll pause and talk slower, but yeah, that's exactly it. It doesn't have anything to do with your business revenue. It's just your personal income, and so you should be eligible for the CRB. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The others, again, Brendan, I may ask for your help because I don't know, I don't have the answer for this one. Maybe you do, but if we don't, then we'll get this for you. Anita, so Anita is asking about how does small businesses get the $1,000 one-time PPE grant from the province of Ontario? Do you know anything about that, Brendan, at this point? Might be premature.
Oh, goodness.
No,
yeah,
okay.
it's a little premature. So they made the announcement without actually putting the details forward, as has happened a lot this pandemic. We don't know yet, but do call into Business Resources. Maybe give us a day, and then we'll get some more information, hopefully. But we can look into that for you.
Yeah, my sense too is that they've announced it, but they haven't announced how it's going to be accessed at this point. And as soon as it is, we will have it up on our website for sure.
So Corinne, Brad is asking one that's probably on everyone's mind and applying to CEWS and the wage subsidy actually, is will CEWS be taxable income?
Yes. All of these subsidies are taxable income, including the forgivable portion of a CEBA grant as well. So all of that becomes taxable. The wage subsidy and the, I suspect the rent subsidy will work the same way, that they will be taxable when you receive them. On the grant, the one that we're a little uncertain about is on the CEBA. We've been trying to get clarity because you don't technically get that forgiven until you've paid back the loan at the end of 2022. But we're trying to, and we spoke just yesterday, in fact, to EDC about this, who's also trying to get clarification from CRA about when do you apply that extra 10,000 under the 40,000 grant, or 20,000 if you get the new one, as a taxable income. And so that's the only one that's, you're going to have to claim it at some point. It's just when you claim it is the question mark on that one. But for the others, you claim it obviously for 2020, because that's when you're getting the money.
I'd like to chime in on that too, Corinne, if I may. Word of advice is don't pay that amount back yet. We had a member call in this morning who banks with TD, major bank. She did repay the 30,000 and said, hey, you know, great, I'm going to keep the 10,000. And TD didn't know what to do. And they didn't know what to do because no one's made payments yet. And I don't think there's a lot of directive coming from the government on how to manage that money. So I know that you don't want it hanging over your head, but in one area, nobody knows what to do yet if you do pay your bank back. And actually TD's, they're trying to hold on to that extra $10,000 right now. So obviously we're helping our member with this to try to navigate it. But hold on to it for that reason. And then the other reason is you don't know what's coming down the road. I know maybe you don't want to necessarily use that amount if you don't have to, but it's interest free for, you know, until December 2022. Sit on as a rainy day fund. And if you don't need it, that's great. If you do need it, at least it's there, because chances are it's not going to be offered again. So that's what we're advising is, you know what, just sit on that, collect interest. And if you need it, it's there. If you don't need it, there's problems right now trying to pay it back right away.
Yeah, in fact, I believe they're not supposed to pay it back until at least 2021 at the earliest. And it is interest-free loan, so it's not like you have to worry about interest accumulating by holding on to it. So that's another reason that Brendan's advice, I think, is solid. So you need to just hold on to it because you don't know. And you're not going to accumulate interest anyways for now, not until the end of 2022.
Yeah. Corinne, Farouk is asking a question that we didn't touch on with respect to the CEWS, so I just want to sneak it in here, which is, will it be applicable for businesses that own their land and pay a mortgage to apply to mortgage payments? It did look like interest payments on mortgages are going to be included in the CEWS program, and so that's another thing that I think you and I are going to try and get some clarification on this afternoon from CRA. So the question for we don't have any more details than that at this point, but we'll try and get some.
Yeah, and that may also depend on the legislation, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, if that gets included in there or not. I have Bernie asking how, when, and where to apply for the CEBA loan. So, Bernie, it's funny, you know, we've been in this for so many months now, and you know, we make certain assumptions that we shouldn't. But CEBA is applied for through your bank, so you have to have a business bank account. And then that business bank account with the bank that you have, and you've had to have that business bank account prior to March 1st, by the way, that's the bank, that's where you apply for it, is through your bank. So just go to your bank where your business bank account is, and say you want to apply for CEBA. It's mostly online anyway, so just go to their online portal and it should be all there in clear language, hopefully.
So I've got a couple of, oh, sorry, go, well, I'll just sneak in and then you can go. And again, I've got a couple of people, including Natasha, and there's some others who are making a comment, I think quite disappointed that the rent relief will not be retroactive. I mean, she's making the point she was 66% down in revenue for April, May, so, and she wasn't able to get any of the rent relief to date. So let me just assure those business owners that are on the phone that that was a disappointment for us, and we will continue to fight for that retroactive rent relief. We think it's completely unfair that some businesses were shut out of the program. Government clearly didn't agree with that assessment as being part of their priorities for rent relief going forward, but that doesn't mean it might not still happen, and we continue to advocate on a number of fronts. As Corinne mentioned, the CEBA loans for those with personal bank accounts is another one where we're raising that on a daily basis. Our president is really hot on that one, so we each have our files that we're really pushing, but we will continue to make sure that that this gets raised.
Yeah, I have another one here from Jimmy around the revenue test criteria for the rent subsidy, which I suspect we were talking about this earlier, Laura. A lot of people will have. They want to know what is the base month for the revenue test criteria. and ask is it the same method as the wage subsidy compared to January, February. And so, Jimmy, this is a level of detail we don't have yet. My assumption is, yes, they're going to probably align it with what they're doing with the wage subsidy. So it would likely be based on the same month as the previous year or the January, February period. But we don't know that for sure. That's the level of detail we're still going to have to work through. And hopefully we'll have more details on that in the coming week or two. So, but right now, my assumption is, yeah, it'll be work this very similar way to the wage subsidy to keep it easier for CRA to administer as well.
Another question was whether, Corinne, we expect that there'll be some kind of calculator sheet for rent relief similar to CEWS.
Probably. I would guess that there would be, yes. CRA is pretty good with this. They know that they have to sort of try to figure out a way to make it fairly easy for folks to do, even though it's a complicated process. So I have no doubt it will be that will be part of their planning, is to put together some sort of online calculator and or spreadsheet.
It's funny because different agencies have been administering the different programs. And I think we were all actually quite relieved to hear that rent relief is now going to be administered by CRA of the different agencies. I mean, there may be plenty of things that times where we curse the CRA, but in terms of their administration, we've got great avenues into them. Corinne, you and your team, talk to them regularly, and they've kind of probably done the best job of administering of the different agencies administering them.
Yeah, once it's gotten up and running, it's a fairly quick process once you've applied. The money, especially if you have a direct deposit, comes fairly quickly after the application is completed. So CRA has been much better at managing that. It's hard for us to say that, to be honest, because CRA is sometimes one of our more difficult
really celebrating that CRA is going to be managing this? Yes, we are. Okay.
Yeah.
Brendan, let me pull you in. I know you're busy typing away, answering various questions, but are there any you'd like to throw out to the group for the group to hear?
Yeah, there is actually. It's one that's coming in over and over, and it's such an insightful question, and I might have to lean on you, Corinne and Laura, for the answer. And hopefully you don't have to correct my answer, but from my knowledge base. So basically, people are asking for the $38,000 cap that you can earn while collecting the CRB. Does your CERB, your CERB earnings from before count toward that $38,000 as earnings?
No, my understanding is no.
Okay, then I've been telling people the wrong thing, and I apologize, everyone. So Justin, Jody, and yeah.
Let's confirm that though. But okay. I am. So one of us, you or I, will do a quick sort of search on this.
Okay.
Because my understanding is it does not include the CERB.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, Justin, Jody, and Nalini, forget what I told you just for a moment, and we'll get back to you on that right away, and we'll get you the real information. My apologies for that. So yeah, we'll check back in a second. Thanks.
Yeah, and as those of you who have joined us regular on the webinars know, I mean, like we're pretty good at keeping up with all the latest and greatest, but occasionally even Corinne occasionally makes a mistake. Rare, very rare. I can tell you, I've worked with her for over a decade, and very rare. But even Corinne occasionally makes some mistakes. I'm trying to keep track of all these programs. Okay, so we'll get that clarified for you. Okay, of course, there is always the challenge with new businesses. And so a question from Dawn, who took over an existing business in BC in May. Can we apply for any of these subsidies? Is that something we have to take away and go and ask CRA, or do we have detail on that, Corinne?
Sorry, I was doing the search. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so Dawn took over an existing business in BC on May 1st. Can she apply for any of the subsidies? Because that's an interesting one. It's not starting a new business, but taking over an existing business. Can she look at or does it count as a new business? Or do we need to ask? Because I think Dawn might need to get back to do
some digging on that one, because unfortunately for new businesses, generally they don't qualify for many of these programs. It really has to do with whether the business number changed. So, because a lot of them are based on their BN number, the CRA BN number, business number. And if that has not changed, she might be okay. But if it has changed, then it could be more difficult. And I'm just going back to Brendan, your old question, you were right. I was wrong. So it does count.
I didn't want to be right, but okay, there you go. So yeah, certain payments do count towards your 38,000.
Corinne's never wrong, almost never wrong.
I'm wrong. It's too much information. That's what it is. But yes, no, Brendan is correct. It is included as part of your 38,000.
Okay. December 2019. You might be okay. Okay, Stephanie, on the rent relief, is my business, another new business, open December 2019? How can I apply if I have no revenue comparison? So Corinne, you and I were talking about this, and you were saying that we hope that what they'll do is look at January, February, and compare to that. January, February 2020 is what they do on the wage subsidy. And
correct.
So Stephanie, we've got to confirm this, but we're hoping that that they're going to line up the rent subsidy as they seem to be doing with the wage subsidy. And if that's the case, you should be able to compare to January, February of 2020. So that hopefully will be helpful. Okay, so I just want to, Susanna's got a question on CEWS, lots of CEWS questions here that I'll try and clear up the confusion, because this is the same as the wage subsidy, Corinne, and I think this confuses people, right? She's saying, okay, it starts October 1st, correct, and it's available till June 2021. That's also correct, Susanna. But what does it mean when it says until December 19th? Okay, and it is a bit confusing. And so what's happening is they're designing the program one way between now and December, and I think they're waiting to see if the economy recovers and is in much better shape. They may reduce some of the generosity of the rent subsidy for the next period, but they want to wait and see. And so they're designing it one way with one formula for between October and December, and they're giving themselves some wiggle room for whether they keep that exactly the same all the way through June, or whether they change the scale a little bit. So you still get a rent subsidy, but it might be lower. Same with the wage subsidy. So hopefully I found that very confusing too. So hopefully that clears it up. It will run through June, but we know exactly what it's going to look like. Well, not exactly, but we know the broad parameters between now and December, and then they're going to release some new ones. Corinne, maybe you can explain it in a different way, so in case my way wasn't clear.
No, I think you said it clearly. It's I think given the incredibly changing nature of the COVID situation, they are giving themselves some flexibility. So, because they've already had to pivot so many times on these programs because they thought they'd be done in 4 months. And here we are 7 months in, and it's getting worse again. And they've had to sort of make things more generous again because businesses have to close down. So I actually think it's, as long as they can do it like close to, not too far into the distant future, I don't think it's a bad idea to sort of say, okay, from now till then, you have some assurance. But we don't know what's going to happen in January. And do we need to, are we in a position where we can start to decrease it? Or are we still in a position where we have to maintain it or, God forbid, increase it because things are getting worse, right? So I think that's a bit of the thinking behind why they're doing that. So that's why you're only getting the details now until December. But we are assured it will run until June of next year, but we just don't know what it looks like from December or January to June.
Right. So we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll wind up here. Rent is monthly, but how does it work for December 19th, 2020? Jimmy, you're asking the same question that I was asking. It looks like they may be trying to line up the dates for the rent subsidy along the same lines as the wage subsidy, but rent is month to month. So that is our number one question for CRA this afternoon, because I feel like that's going to make things very complicated and confusing. So we're going to try and get some clarification on that from CRA. And then just a pile of other questions, specific questions on the rent subsidy. Chris is asking, about applicable to mortgage interest. So we're going to get some clarification on that this afternoon. Hopefully, we'll at least ask. and also renting from a non-arm's length company. We're going to try and sort out all of those details. Talk to CRA. So your questions are really, really helpful. And I apologize to all of you who have gotten questions in and we don't have answers yet, but CRA themselves are probably still working out some of these details. So hopefully we'll have more detail for you on our next webinar. And with that, I'll go to Corinne and Brendan, see if there are any last questions, and then I think we'll wrap up. So I'll go to you if you have last question and maybe make your wrap up comment, and then we'll let everyone go because we're over the hour. Brendan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was indeed some good news, and we all need some small wins these days. And actually, it's interesting too, because as Laura and Corinne know, one of our BR counselors had a great win on behalf of a member who was trying to claim a $10,000 training grant, and we were able to go to bat for them and get that approved. So that was a nice win for us. And yes, you know, we did get some wins last week in terms of the program adjustments. Doesn't mean we're going to stop working. We know that they're far from perfect, and there's still a lot of businesses falling through those gaps. So I know Corinne and Laura and Dan and all of our lobbyists are working extremely hard to have those gaps filled. But also know that on the BR side, do give us a call. We get a ton of calls these days, but we're never too busy to get back to you, and we strive to do that in as efficient and quick a manner as possible. And there's no problem too small or too large for us to help you out with. So you just need someone to talk to. You do need professional advice. Give us a shout at Business Resources. We're always here to help you, and you know, if need be, we're a shoulder to cry on, because if you don't have anywhere else to go, it can be seriously lonely being a small business owner sometimes. So we're here for you no matter what the issue is. Don't hesitate to call us. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Brendan. Corinne?
So I just want to start by saying I apologize in advance that we probably haven't been able to get to many of your questions, but you know, we're going to do everything we can to update our website. Our counselors are certainly available if you want to give them a call if we didn't get to your question. We will be back next week and be happy to answer more questions and hopefully have more information than we can provide. I will already tell you, I've already seen a number of really good questions and even some good suggestions that I think are important for us to raise. So thank you. Continue to do that. We are sort of in the zone right now where government is saying, okay, we've announced it, now we need your help to get it out there. So we're going to be using this feedback as soon as this afternoon, as Laura has mentioned, in a discussion we're going to have with CRA on how the new rent subsidy might work. So this has been great. I also wanted to mention one of the questions, and I don't recall the person's name now, talking about, you know, all the nightmare that T4s and personal income taxes are going to be come next year, and maybe need an extension on that. I think it's a great suggestion, given that it's going to be a lot more complicated to do our taxes next year. And so please continue to do that. It allows us to really do our jobs well and hopefully get tweaks and changes that are going to help you access these programs and help you a little bit in your day-to-day, because I know it's a bit discouraging out there in some parts of Canada, and hopefully we can help you just a little bit get through it. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon, or hear from you all again soon.
Thanks, Corinne, and thanks, Brendan. Let me start by thanking you guys for doing such an awesome job, and just to come up behind both of you. First of all, to come up behind Corinne. It is a partnership, and your questions are fantastic. And Alexa, I'm going to ask you to do me a huge favor, and in record time, if you could pull together the questions on CEWS from this webinar, because for that call that Corinne and I have later. That would be excellent. And then we can try and make sure we've got as many answers. And for those of you that have not been part of these regular webinars, you may not know the way we work, but these are the general kind of announcements, and we give as much detail as we can. And then typically in following webinars, we're then providing the answers to the questions that we don't have answers to after we've had a chance to go back to CRA or CMHC or whoever the agency is that's administering the programs. And so we use the frequently asked questions that we get from you to then update the content on the webinar. So as the programs become available, we'll be getting more detail, and the legislation on the rent subsidy hasn't gone through yet, so that may change things a little bit. And then I just come up behind Brendan on, Brendan always talks about the importance of, you know, looking after yourself, and feel free to call us if you just need someone to talk to. I mean, it can be really hard to ask for help. And sometimes that help is just, you just need someone to listen to. You kind of vent a little bit about the emotional stress of what's going on, and the business counselors are always happy to lend an ear. I know they've been doing an awful lot of that for businesses right across Canada. So just kind of look after yourself. I know it's hard to ask for help, but it's important. It's important, as I was telling my kids yesterday. Everyone's having a hard time in different ways, and we have to help each other as a community, and hopefully this webinar is a small part of that for you. But we are all here, and we are all in your corner. That's what we do. That's what motivates everyone at CFIB, from the president right down to our mailroom. So you've got us in your corner, and again, hopefully that is some small measure of help as you continue to work through tough times. And we'll get to as many questions as we can. We'll keep our website updated, and we'll be here again next week. We're also next week doing a webinar for non-members as part of Small Business Week. So if you know anyone who might want to, who may not be a member of CFIB, but who may want to hear from this panel, please feel free to forward that. I think we're going to get that out in an email to everyone as well. So for now, we'll say we're over and out, but we look forward to staying in touch and hopefully having many of you back next week. And with that, Alexa, we will end the webinar. Thanks, everyone.